Hello, and welcome to eBacon's webinar, Time Tracking, a Guide to Accounting and Payroll Management. My name is Shauna Coronado, and I'll be your host for today's session, which is proudly hosted by eBacon and by Lisa Raiche at the Construction CPA. Before we dive in, let me introduce Alex Steele. Alex is an expert in construction payroll and workforce management with experience helping businesses like yours streamline their operations and reduce costs. At eBacon, we believe in empowering construction teams to focus on what they do best, building America's future by simplifying payroll concerns like time tracking. All right, in today's session, here's what we're going to cover: the hidden costs of inaccurate time tracking, why paper timesheets might be holding your business back, how electronic time tracking can improve your profitability and compliance. We'll also share actionable strategies to help you reduce errors, enhance future bids, and simplify certified payroll. Now, feel free to drop your questions in the question box at any time. We'll answer them during the Q&A segment at the end. And so without further ado, Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction and the agenda, Shauna. I'm really excited to dive into time tracking today, and more importantly, I hope everyone walks away with learning a few things about how effective time tracking can be. So, why even care? Why do companies even track time to begin with? Well, companies need to track time to make sure that they're paying their employees the right amount. If they pay them too much or pay them too little, they could be running into profitability issues or even legal issues. So nobody wants that. We also want to stay in compliance with labor laws and everything associated with them. We never want to get into a situation where an employee or an employer are battling about hours and it becomes a he said versus she said argument. Those never end up too well. But now that we've talked about the needs, let's get into the wants. Job costing, profitability, enhancing bids, they all kind of tie into each other. It's like one large circle and each one flows into the other. If you don't track time, how are you going to job cost? If you don't job cost, how are you going to be profitable? And with that, if you don't job cost, how are you going to make accurate bids for that matter? Short answer is you can't. So very important things. We need to make sure time is being tracked to get these done. And lastly, we have the filing certified reports. As anyone who deals with certified reports knows, these can be quite the hassle, especially if on top of that you're doing it manually. I had a conversation a few months ago with this man who said, we don't job cost. And then about 15 minutes later, he told me about how some of his bids actually lose him money. That's why we care about tracking time. Nobody ever wants to get done with a project and they spent their whole time grinding their teeth wondering if they actually made money or not. So definitely need to be tracking time for these practical and legal reasons.
Well, that is really important. And Lisa, I have a question for you, for our audience. Can you share an example of how poor tracking affected a construction company's profitability or compliance?
I see it over and over again. Clients either don't track at all, or what they're doing is a very convoluted manual process. And we actually consulted on a client a couple years back. Construction company doing about 10 million in gross revenues. Their controller, he's on for a good 100 and a year in salary, and every Monday morning he was chasing hours. He's chasing usually the same 5 to 8 guys every Monday morning, spends most of his entire Monday chasing time in order to process payroll for the next week. And so to me, that is the biggest and largest absolute waste of a very well-paid individual. And with something, if they actually had the right processes in place, could make it a lot easier. So yeah, that's your profitability running right out the window.
And one example of many, I'm sure. Well, Alex,
plenty.
Can you tell us more, Alex, about the drawbacks of paper timesheets?
Yeah. Well, first off, we have the human error aspect. This includes a multitude of examples, but my favorite is fat fingers. We all hit the wrong key every once in a while, or place a decimal in the wrong spot. I've heard a prospect say that they were trying to key in $500 for bonuses, and they keyed in 5,000 instead a few times. And I mean, you think that doesn't have a real effect? I can promise you it does.
Mhm.
Um, or actually, even in another example of what Lisa just kind of got into. What about the project manager who's getting paid 150,000 and that gets lumped into doing payroll 20% of their job? It's so manual, it's so time consuming, and now these project managers can't even take on more jobs more projects because they're doing payroll. If you have the right processes in place, that won't happen. Um, or, what about your admin who spends her entire day tracking down the same, few guys, and their handwriting's so bad that she can't even tell if it was an 8 or a 5. And, now she's working her entire nights because she spent the whole day tracking these guys down. And, she's at the point where she might even walk away from the company just because she doesn't want to deal with these, time consuming manual processes anymore. They're very inefficient and they really do eat away at profitability. Um,
Mhm.
kind of a At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a stat there that says 75% of businesses struggle with employees writing in false hours. You know, Using that example, someone's making $40 an hour, um, and 4.5 hours, that's $180 every week right off of your bottom line. And that's every employee you have as well. If you don't think that eats away at your profitability, you're wrong. But with that example, it's not like these guys are trying to steal time from you or anything like that. It's the system that allows it. There are zero safeguards around how the time gets into the system, and by human error, inaccuracies, all of that stuff, it's gonna happen.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is before we even touch on the certified aspect of payroll as well. If you think your admins are already doing all of that regular work, and then you add the certified piece on top of it, which is much more complex, and you have your field workers as well who are known to be a little bit more lethargic when they're working on prevailing wage projects just because of the amount of money they're making compared to their usual jobs. So if you think that they're not going to fudge more hours, you're wrong. They will. And with everything that we kind of just talked about, I mean, if you don't think that affects your bottom line, once again, I think you're wrong.
Alex, at a really high level, can you explain or elaborate more on geofencing and device-specific tracking? How
Yeah,
does it
yeah.
address this?
So really quickly, geofencing device-specific tracking will track the device the clock in is coming from and the location of the clock in. So what that's going to stop is buddy punching, which is when other people are punching in coworkers who aren't even at the job site. So that that and offsite punching will be eliminated through geofencing and device-specific tracking.
Excellent. Well, let's go on to the drawbacks, the cost of poor time tracking.
Yeah, so just at a glance at the slide here, you'll be able to see that almost all companies, overspend 5% of their gross payroll. And that's, you know, 2,080 hours a year times $40 of the total burden of each employee times the 12 employees and multiply that by your 5% overpayment. That's $50,000 every single year, and that's just your field workers' labor costs alone. This is before we even factor in your admin salary time, your project manager salary time, and all of the time consuming and processing the data. I mean, you know, throw certified in there. I mean, once again, just adding money to that $50,000. So, in conclusion, when someone says, "Oh, we use an in-house system to save the money," they're actually using a system that costs them, 5x, 10x compared to what a really nice electronic time system would cost them.
It makes a lot of sense to get a digital time tracking system.
It does.
So let's talk about that. Why an electronic time system?
Yeah. So like you said, let's transition from the problems associated with those paper timesheets to the solutions of electronic time tracking. And before I start on these topics, I just want to say that all of these are really good functions of an electronic time system. So when you're looking for your system, they might not have all these functions, but I would suggest that when you're looking for them, you make sure that they do have them. Otherwise, you're kind of defeating the purpose of using one. But kind of already touched on geofencing, but the capability to geofence at a high level means when an employee clocks in, the device's location is tracked to make sure that they're in the vicinity of the job, and the employee is attempting to clock into. Therefore, the stories of people clocking in on their way to the job or from the office or even from their home sometimes, they're no longer possible. And if you think about it from a practical standpoint, you're going to get a lot more accurate labor costs as well, which always talking about, improving your profitability and enhancing future bids, which that will do. Which kind of brings me into my next one here. Something you really need to make sure that your electronic time system has is the ability to switch tasks. This is essential for your industry because more often than not, we hear about the employees out in the field who are switching their tasks throughout the day. To get accurate job costing reports, it is imperative that these are tracked accurately. Your electronic time system needs to have the functionality to let your guys switch their tasks throughout the day. Otherwise, on the back end of payroll, your admins are spending their time making manual edits or changing the rates with the different tasks, and it all becomes a nightmare, just like paper timesheets again. So you're kind of diminishing the point of an electronic time system. So I implore you to make sure your system has this functionality. And I don't think we've talked about this yet, but the general ledger exports, once again, really important to make sure that they are robust enough to move into your accounting system without messing with them. Because what I hear a lot is, oh, ABC payroll company, they gave us a GL export for us, but it's so bad. Our admins spend a whole day making manual changes to it and coding it, so it's good enough to go into our accounting system. That's kind of one of those moments where it's like, I'm glad you have, ABC payroll company and you guys aren't doing it all yourself, but kind of diminishing the whole reason of an electronic time system. You want it to run itself in a sense. It's, if it's not good enough to where you feel like you're spending as much time making changes to the system than doing payroll yourself, then why even have it to begin with? And lastly, we have the clock out survey. Companies should always be trying to be proactive compared to reactive. And what I mean by that is with the clock out system, you should ask them if they got injured throughout the day, or if they had their lunch breaks, or if their time is accurate. Instead of them coming back 5 days later and being like, oh, I got hurt last week, what are you going to do about it? Because now you have to act reactively, and that's never good. That never turns out too well.
Without a doubt. Lisa, let me ask you, have you noticed a significant improvement when people use an electronic time system?
Absolutely. One of the big things is workers' comp. So workers' comp is incredibly expensive. If you're more accurate on your time, you're not overpaying on your workers' comp, which can be a very large dollar amount for most of our clients. The other thing we see is the jobs, not only is the time accounted for appropriately, their team members are getting paid properly, it's actually getting coded to the correct jobs the first time out. We have one of our clients who still, the admin does a very elaborate entry every week in order to assign all of the time from that week to the appropriate jobs. We saw how integral that piece was, and how not having it is a problem, because that individual was actually out for a bit at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. And we got we got a taste of what was going on in terms of things living and breathing with one individual. And especially when it's a manual heavy process, it got really scary at one point, because you're looking at it saying, well, we're really behind on this, this, and this. we've lost tracking for this period of time because it all lived with this one person. Had it been a more electronic system, again, they have an electronic actual payment system, but the reality is it doesn't track it by the job, doesn't have that integration that they truly need. So very manual heavy outside of the collecting time and paying the team every Friday.
Makes a lot of sense. Alex, let's move on to the ideal time tracking scenario.
Yeah. So, kind of like what Lisa just touched on, a lot of people are very dependent on manual processes. And when you lean on someone like that, it can, one, strain that person a lot, and two, what happens if they needed to leave? You're, you're kind of screwed in a sense. So a scenario like this um, will keep that from happening. So your worker is at the job site and they directly clock into the system, which eliminates paper and re-entering data. The clock in will record the time of the clock in, obviously, the job that they are on, and the job cost code, which will assign the labor worked to a specific job and task. Um, After a week of working, this time is submitted to payroll. Any edits can be made by the manager who approves time or the employee that submits the time. This will then need to be approved before payroll is ran. But since time was fed directly into the system, which has all of your wages auto assigned, a quick check for errors and edits on the time submitted by your employees is the only thing that the admin needs to check before they can run payroll. Anyone can do that. Um, the payroll process itself should also automate other things like PTO requests or expense reimbursements. But once payroll is completed, a general ledger export should be created that has all of your labor expenses tied to specific job and tasks, like we mentioned before. It shouldn't need to be modified. It should just ensure a seamless process right into your accounting system for job costing. This entire process of running payroll should only take you a few minutes. It should be a fraction of the time you were spending while doing it on paper, or it should be a fraction of the time using a lousy electronic time system.
A lousy
And
system.
yeah, um, so at the end of the day, you're getting more robust and accurate data, which is always nice.
Yeah, perfect. All right, it's time to discuss our takeaways for today's webinar. Alex, give us a run through.
So paper timesheets are filled with errors, and for that reason, we obviously don't recommend it. You're going to be saving your admins a lot of time and money because it's only going to take them a fraction of the time instead of hours and hours or even days in many cases around to just about 15 minutes. So, you know, with the accuracy of an electronic time system as well, you're also going to eliminate the overpayment of wages. Um, Kind of like what Lisa touched on before, those overpayment of wages are actually going to lower your payroll taxes and lower your workers' comp premiums associated with those wages. So it's almost like a double burden you're getting rid of there. But the problem is, change is always going to be hard, no matter what you're doing. So in this case, when you're looking for a system to go with, find one that has multiple ways to get everyone involved. Don't go with the system that says it's our way or the highway, because in every situation, not everyone's going to agree with that way. And you're going to end up putting in more work into the system than it's worth for your specific company. So you want a company that will adapt with your needs and is willing to work with you. Um, so, we've talked about a lot of great stuff today. Hopefully, you're going to walk away and say that this is, worth 30 minutes of my time, if nothing else. So, now knowing why to get away from paper and what to look for in an electronic time system, specifically, let's get into what we do. you know, Put simply, everything we've talked about is what we do. We do everything we've talked about today. So uh, obviously, I'm a little bit biased. I get that, but I really do believe that we do it better than anybody else. It's because we're built for construction. We understand the needs of contractors and everyone else struggling with laborers out in the field. And as we've discussed, we capture everything for them. Not to sidetrack here with a story, but it was one of my favorite conversations I've had with a prospect. By the end of the demo, she admits that she didn't even want to be on the demo at first. But at the end, she was saying that, this is life changing. This this would revolutionize the way that we run our business. It was definitely a little bit of a pat on the back. I get that. Maybe a little bit self-serving as well, but I think you can appreciate why I'm saying this. It really is that type of system for companies. It doesn't matter what you construct or how you do it, or if you're certified or not, we handle it. And, we will simplify that entire process again to just minutes instead of hours and hours. So I would love to, just have a 15-minute conversation with you to, see if it makes sense for you. It's going to be very low key, very conversational. And if we find out, well, we can help you in any way, we'll continue. And if not, we'll part way as friends.
That sounds great. And I know that Lisa can back you up that this is life changing for a lot of businesses. So excellent. Let's move on to questions and answers. Let's get some Q&A out there. And we do have a couple questions that have come in. Jim asks, what steps should a payroll manager take to transition from paper timesheets to an electronic tracking system without disrupting operations?
And that's a good question. There are so many ways to transition your team from paper timesheets to an electronic time system. I've heard, XYZ, ABC, all of them. But in my experience, the common denominator is that educating your workers on the system itself is really important. Don't just throw it on them and expect them to understand how to use it. I know this can be really challenging with everyone's busy schedule, but being proactive in educating your workers will always save you so much time in the long run.
Mhm. Susan is asking a question too. She says she's concerned about geofencing and she wants to know more about task switching features and how that improves job costing accuracy when you're using geofencing.
Okay. Well, I think we already touched on this a little bit in the
Yeah.
presentation, but obviously, obviously it's what people care about,
Expand.
so no problem going over it again. Geofencing and switching features will enhance your job costing because it's all about assigning labor to a specific job and task. Geofencing will ensure that the labor is being assigned to the correct job by making sure that they are at the job when they say they are. The task switching features will also ensure that the labor is being assigned to the correct task, and will allow the workers in real time to switch their tasks and now assign the labor to that new task. This will also save your admins a ton of time in the back office, so they don't have to assign labor to a specific job and task. So um, assigning the labor accurately is what allows companies to know what actually happens in the field. So when they are bidding on new projects, they have accurate historical data to go off of.
Very good. There's one last question, and this one is, hold on, I'm looking it up. This one is from June. June says, how does electronic time tracking really assist with certified payroll requirements and prevailing wage laws, specifically with compliance?
Okay. Well, the way I like to think about it is that compliance is a two-headed monster, and tracking time efficiently will, I guess, slay both of those monsters. The first way is to ensure what is happening in the field is actually what happens. So if a company can track time effectively, that will occur. Um, the other way to keep in compliance is making sure that the information itself is correct so that when it's transferred to whatever documents are needed for that specific job, they're getting paid the correct amount. So if time is being tracked accurately. It will make sure that it'll make sure that what happened in the field is actually what happened, which is staying in compliance, and will make sure that the wages are being paid correctly for that job, which is also staying compliant. So that is how tracking time will keep you compliant.
Makes sense. I have one more question that's coming up. This is from Patricia, and it's actually for Lisa. Lisa, can you tell Patricia, how can electronic time tracking systems integrate with payroll software to reduce errors? In your practice, how does that work?
Oh, yeah, it's super helpful because all of that ultimately integrates into their job cost system, which it ultimately integrates into whatever accounting they're using. Historically, that was all done by hand. Somebody had to manually enter everything into a payroll system, and then somebody manually entered everything into a job cost system where somebody had to manually assign all the labor and the tasks to the right line items in the jobs, and then it poured it all into the accounting system. So now you're cutting a lot of manual work out, which is a godsend on our end because all of that goes away and you can actually have these people doing other things that'll be more important in your business than actually keying in. Again, like with anything else, you're going to have people fat finger things all the time if you're doing it manually. So, I mean, I love the idea, and the more clients I can get on board with using a system like this, I am giddy because when we are reviewing jobs with them and their PMs are reviewing the cost associated with the jobs, there's actually more accuracy in those numbers. And so it's not just bidding on the next job, it's actually understanding where your costs and your labor costs are going into the job this week or last week so that you can get your arms around it before the job is gone and done. So I'm very excited. Once all of these things are all synced together and they're speaking harmoniously, it simplifies the manual that we historically in accounting had to do for years. Now we can actually give people real analytical data that they can make decisions off of instead of spending hours and hours hand keying in things. So, I mean, I love it. It makes me super happy. As long as you buy in from your management, you know, the PMs that you're going to be using a system like this, they can easily educate the rest of the team. And it's a win across the board, especially when you're trying to cost, you know, on your jobs. You can get more real-time data versus the dead and buried. And once the job's gone, there's really not a lot of opportunity for you to go back and improve your profitability on something that's gone. So to have that real time, maybe a week or two out versus months and months is super, super helpful.
Great. It makes the whole process better. That's wonderful. All right. We're going to wrap up this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found the session helpful and that you're inspired to take steps toward more accurate and efficient time tracking. Now, if you'd like to explore solutions tailored to your business needs, don't hesitate to schedule that 15-minute call with Alex. You can reach him at alexs@ebacon.com. And finally, we'll be sending out the recording for your reference and we'll include a few surprises to keep you in the know. Nothing like getting a few free gifts along the way. So have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.